March 15th, 1944. Pratt Army Airfield, Kansas. A routine engine test turns into a nightmare. Captain Robert Bob Morgan, a veteran of the brutal European Air War, now trains new crews on the B-29 Superfortress. He watches, helpless, as a gout of orange flame erupts from the No. 3 engine of his $600,000 bomber. The Wright R-3350 duplex Cyclone, 2,200 horses of raw American power, is devouring itself from the inside out. Black, oily smoke chokes the air. This is the fourth engine fire this week on this one airfield. Morgan slams the fuel cutoff and hits the fire suppression switch. Nothing happens. The CO2 system cannot reach the heart of the inferno, burning deep within the engine's rear cylinders. His voice, cold with practiced dread, barks into the intercom, "Abandon aircraft, now!" His crew, drilled to instinct, evacuates in under 45 seconds. They stand on the Kansas tarmac, watching their warplane burn. By the time the fire trucks arrive, the aluminum wing spar is molten wax. The aircraft is not just damaged, it's a total loss, destined for the smelter. The taste of ash in Morgan's mouth isn't just from the fire. It's the taste of a terrifying truth. This is not combat. This is home. This is training. And it's an epidemic. The disaster at Pratt is not an isolated incident. It is a symptom of a hidden crisis strangling America's most critical weapon. At Smoky Hill Army Airfield, another superfortress burns on the runway. At Walker Field, two more ignite during simple engine run-ups. At Great Bend, the horror reaches its peak. A fully loaded B-29 explodes during takeoff, killing all 11 crewmen before it even leaves American soil. The statistics are a secret, classified nightmare. Of the first 175 B-29s delivered, 16 have burned to scrap. Another 47 suffered major engine fires. America's most expensive weapon, a project costing more than the Manhattan Project, has a 35% engine failure rate. In Washington, General Henry Hap Arnold, commander of the Army Air Forces, faces a collapse. He promised President Roosevelt that B-29s would be bombing Japan by June 1944. But at this rate, the program will kill more American boys in Kansas than the Japanese Zeros ever will over Tokyo. The finest minds at Boeing and Wright Aeronautical are baffled, trapped in a spiral of redesigns and delays. But what no one in that burning Kansas sky knows, what no general, no engineer could possibly foresee, is that the solution will not come from a laboratory. It will come from a 38-year-old mechanic who learned his trade not in aeronautics, but in the cramped basements of Cleveland, installing pipes for a living. The race to save the B-29 is on, and the unlikeliest hero is about to enter the fight. The heart of the problem was the R-3350 duplex Cyclone, an engine of breathtaking ambition and fatal contradiction. On paper, it was a masterpiece, 18 cylinders arranged in two tight rows, delivering 2,200 horsepower to propel the massive B-29 at 350 miles per hour. In reality, it was a thermodynamical trap. The front 9 cylinders, bathed in the 200-mile-per-hour slipstream ramming through the cowling, ran hot but manageable. The rear 9 cylinders, however, sat in a deadly shadow, starved for airflow and choked by the heat of the row in front. During a critical climb, temperatures in these rear cylinders could spike to 650 degrees Fahrenheit, far beyond the design limits. At 575 degrees, exhaust valves would fail. At 600 degrees, aluminum heads warped, pistons seized on screaming crankshafts, and connecting rods snapped like gunshots. The result was a catastrophic engine grenade that sprayed white-hot oil onto the superheated magnesium engine casing. This alloy, chosen for its lightness, would then ignite with the fury of a thermite bomb, burning at 5,600 degrees Fahrenheit, a temperature that could slice through the bomber's aluminum wing spar in 90 seconds. The aircraft's built-in fire extinguishers were useless, flooding the outside of an engine that was burning violently from within. The B-29 wasn't just a bomber. It was a flying fuel-air bomb waiting for its own engine to light the fuse. Faced with this rolling catastrophe, America's elite engineering minds launched a frantic counterattack. Boeing redesigned cowl flaps and enlarged air intakes, but the improvements were marginal. Wright Aeronautical's investigators discovered a critical flaw. The thin aluminum baffles meant to direct air over the cylinders had less than half an inch of clearance, stifling airflow. The solution seemed obvious: redesign the baffles. But that simple fix triggered an engineering avalanche. Changing the baffles meant changing the cowling, which meant altering the wing structure, which was tantamount to redesigning the entire aircraft. Boeing's estimate was a death sentence for the timeline: 18 months and $50 million. General Hap Arnold didn't have 18 months. The promise to bomb Japan by the summer of 1944 was crumbling, and the very weapon meant to win the long-range war was killing its own crews on the ground. A sense of doomed inevitability settled over the program. Pilots, smelling the constant scent of burnt oil and fear on their home bases, began to whisper a new grim nickname for the Superfortress. They called it the Flying Coffin. By June 1944, the crisis demanded a national-level response. The National Advisory Committee for Aeronautics, NACA, the nation's pinnacle of aeronautical science and precursor to NASA, entered the fray. At their Cleveland laboratory, a B-29 was installed in the massive altitude wind tunnel, a chamber that could simulate the thin, freezing air of 30,000 feet. For weeks, teams of the country's top engineers meticulously measured every aspect of the R-3350's performance. They confirmed the grim reality with cold, scientific precision. The rear cylinders were being slowly baked to death due to fundamentally inadequate airflow. The data was irrefutable, but the conclusion was a death knell for hopes of a quick fix. The expert consensus, delivered in a classified report, was devastating. The problem was thermodynamically unsolvable within the existing engine architecture. The R-3350, they asserted, was simply too powerful for its own size. It generated more heat than its structure could dissipate. The only path forward was a complete engine redesign, a task that would take years the war did not have. The laws of physics, it seemed, had sided with the enemy. The human cost of this engineering dead end was already being tallied in blood and fear. By September 1944, the brutal statistics were clear. Of the 414 B-29's that would be lost during the war, a staggering 267, nearly two-thirds, would be claimed not by enemy fighters or flak, but by catastrophic engine failures and fires. The 20th Air Force was losing bombers and trained crews faster than factories could replace them. Morale plummeted. Seasoned pilots, who had braved the hellish skies over Europe in B-17's, now faced a more insidious terror. They began calling the B-29 the flying funeral pyre. Desperate men filed formal requests for transfers back to older, slower, but more predictable aircraft, willing to face combat in a flying fortress rather than the specter of a random, unconquerable flame over the peaceful Kansas plains. In the hangars of Pratt, Smoky Hill, and Wright Field, a palpable sense of doom settled. The world's most advanced bomber was grounded by an invisible enemy it carried within itself, and every expert from Seattle to Washington, D.C. had reached the same solemn verdict: there is no solution. While America's top engineers declared the problem unsolvable, the man who would solve it was working the night shift in a Kansas maintenance hangar covered in grease. Antonio "Tony" Validor was a 38-year-old mechanic with a 7th-grade education. Before the war, he had spent 15 years as a residential plumber in Cleveland, navigating cramped basements and solving mysteries of water pressure in old, stubborn pipes. Drafted for his mechanical skills, he was an outsider in the world of aeronautics. The elite engineers saw complex thermodynamics. Tony Validor saw a bad plumbing job. Staring at the exposed guts of an R-3350 after yet another overheat scare, he didn't see cylinders and baffles. He saw a flow problem. The official design hoped cooling air would naturally travel from the front cylinders to the rear, but to Tony's eye, that was like hoping water would flow uphill without a pump. The air, heated by the front row, became sluggish and trapped, forming a hot, stagnant pocket that actually cooked the rear cylinders. He remembered a tenement on Euclid Avenue where the top-floor radiators were always cold because the hot water took the easier path. His solution then was a simple bypass pipe, a dedicated path. In the silent hangar, surrounded by tools and the smell of metal and oil, Tony had his heretical thought. What if I don't try to force air through the mess? What if I route it around? On the back of a maintenance log, he sketched a concept so simple it was offensive to high-altitude science: small, dedicated air ducts. These small air ducts would bypass the front row entirely, scooping cool air and funneling it directly to the suffocating rear cylinders. It wasn't about moving more air, it was about moving air smarter, creating a path of least resistance directly to the point of failure. He knew the credentialed engineers would dismiss it, a plumber's fix for a $3 billion problem. But Tony understood flow. Water, air, it didn't matter. If the current path is blocked, you build a new one. With quiet resolve, he decided to build his proof not on paper, but in metal. He would need scrap aluminum, a cutting torch, and the cover of darkness. The most brilliant minds had hit a wall. Tony Validor, the Cleveland plumber, was about to pick up a wrench. The morning of October 4th, 1944, began with routine dread. Captain James Wheeler climbed into the cockpit of B-29 number 4224605 for a standard engine run-up, a procedure that had become a nerve-wracking lottery. As he advanced the throttle on the right inboard engine, the notorious number 3, the R-3350 roared to its full, deafening 2,800 RPM. Wheeler's eyes were locked on the cylinder head temperature gauge, expecting the needle to begin its inevitable creep past the red line. But it didn't. The needle steadied at an impossible 425 degrees Fahrenheit. Wheeler frowned, tapping the glass. He pushed the engine harder, holding full power for a dangerous 5-minute stretch. The temperature barely flickered, holding a miraculous 120 degrees cooler than any operational R-3350 ever had. Stunned, he shut the engine down and reported a faulty instrument. The mystery was too profound to ignore. When the maintenance crew arrived, they found the answer clamped crudely to the engine. The sight of Tony's hand-bent aluminum ducts sparked immediate fury. The engineering officer descended, his face red with rage. Who authorized this? This is a court-martial offense. Tony was dragged before Major Donald Peterson, the chief of maintenance. Did you modify this engine without authorization? Peterson demanded. Yes, sir, Tony replied, standing straight. Do you understand you could face criminal charges? Tony met his gaze. Sir, the rear cylinders ran 60 degrees cooler. I have a solution. Peterson stared, incredulous. You have a solution? NACA has 50 engineers. With respect, sir, Tony interrupted, a quiet defiance in his voice. It's a plumbing problem. The air needed a dedicated path. I gave it one. He presented the damning, miraculous temperature logs. Major Peterson, a man who had signed too many accident reports, looked from the data to the mechanic and saw not insubordination, but a possible salvation. He had a choice. Bury the incident or bet the war on a plumber's hunch. He made his call. Permission to run another test, Tony said. Peterson nodded. Make it definitive. The test was conducted under Major Peterson's direct supervision, with new thermocouples installed to eliminate any doubt. The result was a silent revolution. As the R-3350 thundered at full war power, the temperature gauges told an unbelievable story. The rear cylinders, the program's killers, now ran a consistent 60 degrees cooler than the front ones. The engine didn't just survive the extended test, it thrived, smooth and steady where it usually screamed in thermal distress. Peterson, a career officer who respected data over dogma, had his proof. He immediately dispatched the results to right field with a terse, explosive note. Mechanic modified cooling system achieves 60-degree F reduction. Request urgent evaluation. 2 days later, Tony Validor found himself on a C-47 transport to Dayton, Ohio, carrying his handmade ducts in a canvas bag like a plumber heading to a job. He was walking into the lion's den of American aeronautics. At right field, Tony faced a conference table of 12 men, the top engineers from Wright, Boeing, NACA, and the Army Air Forces. Their skepticism was a physical presence. Dr. Harrison Evans of Wright Aeronautical led the attack, citing turbulent flow and reduced total airflow. A Boeing engineer dismissed the ducts as unmanufacturable. "This is exactly the cowboy engineering that gets people killed," one exclaimed. Tony, outranked and outdegreed, held his ground, presenting his temperature logs. The debate was a stalemate of worlds, theoretical perfection versus practical function. It was broken by the sudden entrance of Colonel Curtis LeMay, the brutal, cigar-chomping commander of the B-29 campaign in the Pacific. He listened for 1 minute to the engineers' objections. Then he stood. "Gentlemen, shut up." He turned to Tony. "Sergeant, you're telling me you can fix my bombers with some pipes?" "Yes, sir." LeMay fixed the room with a glacial stare. "He's shown you how. You have 20 days to engineer it. I don't care about your principles. I need engines that don't burn." In that moment, the plumber's idea was handed to the experts with a battlefield order: make it work.
Colonel LeMay's order transformed Tony Validor from a rogue mechanic into a reluctant technical consultant, assigned to a team of resentful engineers who viewed his ducts as an insult to their profession. At the Wright Field testing facility, they subjected his crude aluminum pipes to a battery of analyses, determined to either perfect them or prove them fatally flawed. They ran computational fluid dynamics, created intricate technical drawings, and instrumented a test engine with dozens of thermocouples. Their first instinct was to improve the design, optimizing angles, smoothing curves, using exotic alloys. Each optimized version failed, disrupting airflow or adding weight. Tony watched silently, a plumber among astrophysicists, until finally he pointed at the original hand-bent duct. "You're overcomplicating it. The air doesn't care about your calculations. It just needs a clear path." Grudgingly, they returned to his simple design. The subsequent full-power endurance test ran for a brutal 2 hours. The results were incontrovertible. Rear cylinder temperatures dropped by a staggering 120 degrees Fahrenheit. The temperature differential between front and rear rows, once a deadly 155 degrees, was now a safe 30. The engine ran cool, smooth, and reliable. The head engineer, Dr. Evans, had to admit the impossible. The plumber's bypass worked, fundamentally and brilliantly. With data in hand, the battle shifted from engineering to production bureaucracy. Blueprints were stamped "Urgent War Program," but factory managers at Boeing balked. Retooling the production line for a new part would cause delays. The modification was inelegant, a Band-Aid on a masterpiece. Paperwork piled up, citing scheduling conflicts and material shortages. The pushback was a silent institutional mutiny against a solution that hadn't come from the proper channels. The impasse was broken only when a copy of the test results, with LeMay's unmistakable scrawl in the margin, "Fly or Fire," landed on every relevant desk. Production was given a brutal priority. By late November 1944, simplified drawings of the Validor bypass cooling system were on factory floors. Sheet metal workers who understood practical fabrication far better than theoretical drag coefficients began stamping out the simple ducts by the thousands. They nicknamed them Tony's ducts. In hangars across America and later on Pacific Islands, mechanics swarmed over parked B-29's, installing the new arteries. They didn't see a scientific breakthrough, they saw a sensible fix, the kind of pragmatic ingenuity that kept machines alive. The battle was won not in the conference room, but on the shop floor.
The impact was immediate and transformative. As B-29's equipped with Tony's ducts began to flood the Pacific skies in late 1944, statistics that had been written in fire were rewritten. Engine fires per 100 flight hours plummeted from 4.2 to 0.7. Mission abort rates due to mechanical failure dropped by 80%. The B-29 was finally unleashed. From the ashes of the training disasters rose a relentless, steel-skinned armada capable of the unthinkable, flying 3,000-mile round trips to Japan at high power, mission after mission. The firebombing campaign that crippled Japanese industry, the mining of its harbors, and ultimately the atomic missions to Hiroshima and Nagasaki all hinged on an engine that would no longer suicide mid-flight. Conservative estimates state that over the final year of the war, the modifications saved at least 216 B-29's from fiery loss and over 2,300 crewmen from a terrible death. From the Japanese perspective, the change was chillingly evident. Lieutenant General Torashiro Kawabe of the Imperial General Staff noted in his diary the baffling new reliability of the once vulnerable bombers. A Japanese fighter pilot, Captain Saburo Sakai, recalled the despair of seeing the vast formations now flying in perfect formation for hours, their engines never stopping. The war in the air was decisively lost the moment a Kansas mechanic bent his first piece of scrap aluminum. After VJ Day, Tony Validor quietly returned to Cleveland and his plumbing tools. In 1945, the Army tried to award him the Legion of Merit for his contribution. He refused, stating he had simply done his job. A local newspaper discovered the story in 1947, but Tony declined interviews and a small article faded into obscurity. His genius, however, became aviation gospel. The principle of directed cooling, or bypass flow, was integrated into every subsequent air-cooled engine design, from piston engines to the jet turbines of the F-35 and the GE-9X. Engineers adopted the concept, but forgot the name. Tony Validor died in 1982, his obituary noting only his wartime service as a mechanic. At his funeral, an uninvited guest, a veteran of 35 B-29 missions, approached Tony's son. "My crew came home because our engines didn't catch fire," he said. "I've spent 40 years trying to find the man who invented those ducts to thank him." Tony's son was stunned. His father had never mentioned it. The greatest solutions are often deceptively simple, born not from complex theory, but from understanding a fundamental truth. If the flow won't go where you need it, you must build it a better path.